What's up, guys? Nick Palacios here. Welcome to the Tactical Games Podcast. Today I've got James Gill with me. As it sits today, it's the 3rd. We're a couple weeks out from our first regional event of the 2025 season. It seems like the no off-season went by pretty quick, but we're all really excited. And with the new season coming up, we're going to be dropping our new shooting and physical standards for the 2025 season. So Gil and I are going to expand on that today, what those entail, why we put those together, and how they're going to better suit you to be able to train for tactical games, regional events, and nationals moving forward for the season. So starting with the shooting standards, Gil is the person that put those all together for us. So I want to give you the stage and just kind of let's go over what those look like and how people can benefit from using those in their training moving forward for the season.
Yeah, so the idea of what we've done with the shooting standards, so as we're designing stages and we're testing each of you competitors, excuse me, we have a target size, target distance, but there's certain things to look at. Excuse me, we have our published targets, which you can see online. A lot of you guys post your pictures of your shot groups on Facebook, and hey, this is a really tight grouping. And for those of you on the internet that aren't familiar with the sport or haven't shot it just yet and don't know where you stack up, we're starting to put some of these things in perspective. For example, if you have a 6-inch circle that we're shooting and you put all your rounds in the target and you say, how can I improve on that? Well, how long did it take you to do that? So not only do we have target size standards and distances, but we also have a time constraint. And that's on our normal action or 15-minute TTG staple stages.
Yeah.
Then we have our aggregates, as we call them. They're kind of a classifier, if you would. This is a standardized shooting stage that we will have 6 or 7 of these that will be published online. So you'll see the actual description, target size, distance, time limit. All of those things will be published in advance so you guys can go practice those. And you'll see one of those at each of our events, the regionals throughout the year, and then we can draw from those. What we're going to do with those aggregates is we're going to take your scores from one event to the next, and you'll be able to see how you shot against James Gill in Arizona, but you shot the same stage in Utah. And you'll say, I only shot 60% of Gill. And it's going to be super frustrating, but at least you'll have a benchmark of where your performance is. And then we'll have a series of training associated with each of those standards, because our goal here is to help you succeed. So kind of starting off on the general standards that you guys can expect to train to with pistol. What we look at, we go with kind of a target size of about 1.5 inches per increment of 5 yards. So for example, if you're shooting a 15-yard target, you can expect safely to be shooting a 4.5-inch target. Now, that's not going to be 100% certain. Sometimes that target might be at 17 yards or 13 yards or slightly smaller, but at least if you're within that threshold, you know where your performance stacks up. Clearly, we'll have some targets like dot torture, which is a pain.
Yeah.
We shot that previously at 12 yards, and everybody had a fit. But it's a small target. It's intended to be shot at short range. It's more of a drill-based thing, but it is a fun target to shoot these matches. So we're not going to put something like dot torture at 15 or 20 yards.
Yeah.
Not only do we have a target size, but then we have, based on the volume of fire that we're shooting in a stage, we have a pacing limiter that we build into the stage. So if you come off a stage and you're not quite certain how you did, what we kind of publish for pistol specifically, if a string of fire has 10 rounds in it, we program roughly 3 seconds per shot. And that's kind of the formula I'm using there. Some of you may shoot faster than that and achieve hits. Some of you may shoot slower than that, but that's baseline of where we're looking at. Now, rifle, we're going with basically a 4 MOA target size, so roughly 4 inches per 100 yards on a scored paper. We try and keep that same thing with steel. And there's several variations within that. But on a string of fire for rifle, we're looking at about 4 seconds per shot with those. So that's a very good baseline for you guys to go home and train with. And other things that we're looking at with that, we're kind of borrowing some influence from outside shooting sports. So if you guys aren't familiar with some of the terminology that you see online, we can kind of break it down for you. But if you think about it like this, if we have a standardized string of fire where we only allow you to shoot 10 rounds in a string of fire, each of those shots is scored. That's where we're going to have a standardized target size. And we call those, if it's a standardized string of fire, we call that Virginia count. You have one shot per one hit. And then on what we call in other sports might be called Comstock, you'll see on our stages basically load out as desired. We let you load up as many rounds as you want and shoot as many rounds until you hit a target. Generally speaking, on a steel target or something like that on the action stages. So in that case, being that you have the ability to make more shot or take more shots as you need to hit the target, we have a little wiggle room with the size and distance of those targets.
Yeah.
And for more clarity, when these are actually published online, you'll be able to read them in their entirety of target size, distance, and all of those things as we go forward.
Yeah, and the exciting thing about this is, again, between both the shooting standards and the physical standards, and as the sport continues to evolve, having these be standardized in the way that we set up the events in the program is important. And it's important to be able to have that carryover for your training at home. So like training for specificity is the best way that you're going to get better at any given sport. So we really wanted to take that to heart this season and make sure that we offer these for you guys. So that way, you can look at these standards and you can train on any 6 of these, quote, classifier aggregate stages that we do for shooting, or any 6 of the physical standard stages, and really work on your skills, whether it's weapons manipulation, rate of fire, or just building up in weight and being able to get stronger as you go through these standards and stages, because these aggregates and these floater stages will carry over into other like true tactical game style stages where you're shooting and you're doing physical work, but you will also see these at each one of the regionals this year. So practicing them at home is going to be awesome for you guys, because you can work on those standards, work on your scores on those stages, and then knowing that you're going to go to a regional and you'll see any one of these floaters or aggregates as you go through the event.
And this is one of the most common questions that we get from new athletes, new competitors. Everybody comes to our sport with some background, whether it's fitness or shooting or a mix of both or whatever it is. But I get people in arbitration all the time. Well, in the rule is this, and I said that's this sport rule. That's not our sport rule. So to clarify, as we're going through some of these, yes, there are other events that allow you to shoot anywhere on target or by this, and this. And what I've personally done is I like to take the things that are easy to standardize from one sport to the next, like how we score grease rings on target. Is it in the black line? And we just say, if the grease ring is touching the line, we score it. Yep. And, I'd show most of you as you come into the shack to ask me about your hit. I say, do you have a picture of your target? And they say, yeah. And I'm like, just zoom in. Do you see white between the grease and the line? And they're like, yep. And I'm like, it's not touching. And they're like, okay. So it's a pretty black and white definitive answer there on those things. But what we're trying to promote to you guys is some of you might be new to the shooting standards altogether, and you don't know what to look for. And some of you might be really good in the shooting standards, but it does not apply in this environment. So doesn't matter what you've done in other sports or anywhere else. This is what we're building our stages and our programming to. There is a very deliberate why to each of these things that we're doing. And again, if you have more specific questions, you need information, you can always hit us info@thetacticalgames.com or look at our web files on the countless videos that we have published for you. And the other side is, as a competitor signs up, like I've got a bunch of the guys from the action sports that, I try and drag them over. I say, hey, you going to come play in tactical games? And they're like, well, you guys lift really heavy stuff. I'm like, well, I don't. But some people do, yeah. And they're like, well, what are the weights and what are the distances? And this is where we're now standardizing or making a more standardization of the fitness standards for you guys. Most of you know your mile run time. Mine's really slow, but we have a general pacing for that. But now we're going to break it down into each of these categories. Nick's done a really good job with these. So you want to hit on that?
Yeah. So when it comes, like you said, when it comes to the physical standards, and especially for newer competitors, not knowing or maybe having a little bit of an intimidation factor of like, oh, it's seeing like somebody in the elite division where they're lifting heavier sandbags and they're like, well, I definitely can't do that. And they don't know really where to start. They might see us do a specific stage, like Inman where we're lifting a bag over bar. But like what's the bar height? What's the bag weight? What's the bag weight? How many rounds do I do? Things like that. So that's where we really wanted to boil that down and make it as simple as possible to follow. So in the physical standards portion of these files that we'll release as this podcast comes out, these will be available through the website. So we'll put a link in the show notes below here so you guys can access those and start to dive into those. But you'll see a couple of different sections. So one of those is going to be the upper threshold for weights by division by implement. What I mean by implement means like strongman heavy bag, the duffel bags that we use, the jerry cans. So you can see based on the division that you want to compete in, what weights you can expect to see in the upper limits by that specific division. So you'll know what weights you can start to play around with and train with while you're at home in the gym, or if you want to take these to the range and you want to throw these weights around and throw in some shooting, you can do so as well. So aside from that, you'll also see 6 different floater stages that we have. We call these floaters. These are fitness only stages. So within this, you'll see something like max calories for a certain amount of time, bag over bar, where you'll see a specific bar height, and you can utilize different bags based on the division that you want to compete in. So again, these are ways for you to be able to calculate, gain data on this while you're training, and work to boost either however many points or reps you're getting within this, or however many calories, and just again continue to keep building upon that. Aside from that, we also have the limits as far as like specific movements that we do. So one of those ones again is bag over bar. So you'll see the height and the weight. You'll also see something like bag over high bar, which is something that we introduced last year in New Hampshire, where you'll be getting the bag over the bar and your body over the bar. So it's a little bit of a different movement. You're getting up and over that. All these are going to be very standardized movements that we see. There's a way that we're able to score these and judge these. So there's movement standards on these. So that way, again, you know what to do while you're competing, kind of just demystifying those.
Yeah, so on the physical floaters and the shooting aggregates, a good way to think of those as a single stimulus test. So if you shoot it in Arizona or do the physical floater in Arizona, if it's presented again in Utah or Texas or wherever, it will be the same standardized event. Yep. So we can match one for one how Nick and Gill competed heads up against this workout. Yeah. And things to look at as you go down this list, being that we do have 9,000 different implements, and there's different skill sets within the shooting, reloads, manipulations, movements, target distances, all of these things. You can break each of those down into multiple aspects. So on a normal stage, we're testing 12 things all at once. So you might have done very well on lifting that heavy bag, but then you stuck your tongue out and shot goofy, and you're like, well, I don't understand. I thought I should have done better on this stage. So as you look at these publications, if you're, for example, men's intermediate, and you see that the weight for these things is this, and you say, on this one particular implement, this seems too heavy for me. We know a lot of you guys with shoulder injuries, typically the older gentlemen in the sport. Most of you don't have 2 working shoulders. So when we do overhead stuff, we tend to do it a little lighter weight in that one thing. We also know that some of you might excel at one thing or another, so please don't be discouraged by seeing some of these weights published. That doesn't mean that we're going to hit you with a 200-pound bag every time, but you can expect and be required to do a 200-pound bag at some point. Also with these implements, it's easy to point out that our strongman bags, for example, a 200-pound bag, we don't always fill it to 200 pounds. Correct. Sometimes we'll change the media type that's in it, so it'll be the same size of bag, but it might be lighter and it give you a different texture. And some of you are really good at running, but not so strong. And other things, so like if one of the 10 implements seems too tough for you, or one of the 10 throws or carries is too tough for you, don't be discouraged and think that you need to drop a division because of that. Maybe put more of your time and attention into training for that.
Correct. Yeah, and the cool thing with, having the new standards for the fitness side of things and shooting is you can start to blend the two of these together. You don't have to take them as black and white, like, oh, I only have to do this physical floater and that alone, and then only my shooting alone. You can mix the two. If you want to roll in multiple rounds of some of these floaters, I would suggest doing so, which will be fun for you. It'll be similar to what you'll see in our standard classic tactical game stages where you're working out and you're shooting. So you can put in a specific loadout. You can bring some of these implements to the range with you if you have those implements that you can bring with you. Again, just we want to make sure that we arm you guys with as much information and tools as we can to help you be better competitors and feel more just well prepared as you come up for a regional event this year. And we will have one that's going to be specific for regionals, which is going to be available again once this podcast drops. And then we're working on one for nationals specifically. Since nationals is a bigger stage, it's got all the qualifying divisions in there. Those weights will change a little bit. It is supposed to be harder because it is nationals. So you will see some differentiation in there. So later this season, we will drop those for nationals as well too.
Yep, absolutely. And going through each of these particular events, things that you can count on from here going forward. If it's listed as an aggregate or a floater, it is 100% standardized and it will never change.
Yep.
So how you perform is something that you can continue to practice and practice and practice. Our traditional stages, whether it's 12, 15-minute AMRAPs or whatever the case they are, those things we have a much greater variation. Now we have some of our staples, which we're going to publish these as well. The standardized TTG stages where we talk about our historic stages, such as the Inman stage, the heavy bag work stage, rope, like we have axle medley. Now within those, you might see some of those repeat stages-ish at one event to the next, but they're not always the same. Again, the weight, the distance, sometimes it's going to change depending on the venue we go to, but for sure on those aggregates and floaters, we measure those out. Arizona is going to be the same as Utah.
Yep, exactly. And then going back to the shooting standards, is there anything you would suggest based on what we have, what you've put together in there as a good starting point? Would you go, start to finish with the aggregates? Would you focus on one or the other, mix them? What would you suggest for people?
Yeah, so within each of the aggregates, they're intended to be specific isolation drills. Right? This is what we're standardizing, or this is what we're testing for this event. So for those of you just coming into TTG and you say, okay, I got a rifle, 5 mags. I got a pistol and 5 mags, a plate carrier belt, all the required gear. Now what do I do? The first thing we need you to do is make sure you're zeroed. Make sure your gun is hitting where you want it to hit when you pull the trigger. Going forward from there, I tell everybody in all of the tune-ups, you can sign up online before any of our events, and you can talk with me face-to-face for about 8 hours before you actually shoot in an event. I don't know, that might be slightly helpful. But as you go through, we talk about holdovers and knowing where your round and your equipment goes, knowing what you're capable of. So on some stages, you might approach the stage and look at a target that appears to be really small and say, I don't think I can hit that. Okay, well, can you put your reticle in the same place for every shot? If you're doing that, at least we can accurately define how much you need to improve. And part of that is going through and whenever you go to the range and you shoot a grouping, take a picture, save that target so that save that target so that you can document your progression. Now, if you're shooting at a bullseye target, right, it's just a shape of some sort where you're trying to put your rounds in the center of that target or somewhere on that target. Well, once you get to a point where you fire 10 rounds and you hit all 10 rounds in that target shape, well, now start tracking the time. Okay, I'm going to do this in 60 seconds. Did I get all of my hits within 60 seconds? And to start reducing that time. That's where we publish that string of fire at about 4-second cadence per rifle and about 3 seconds per cadence with pistol. And if you're able to get all of your shots on target in that prescribed time period, then maybe try going faster. See if you can work within a tighter confines. That's how you'll pick up time on a stage. And if in that allotted time you're not able to get all your rounds on target, well, then just say, okay, I'm going to make each of these hits count until I run out of time, and I'd much rather have 8 of 10 hits versus just shooting fast to get within the time constraint and having 5 misses, right? So you have to weigh it. So what I recommend to everybody, whether it's fitness, which I don't coach, but shooting specifically, is go at the pace that you are comfortable with, not what Jacob Hepner's comfortable with.
Yeah.
Not what James Gill is comfortable with. Jacob's really strong. Gill shoots really well. What can Nick do compared to James, right?
Correct.
I can pull the trigger at this cadence. So that's where I would say to start, is establish what you can do and do that perfectly every time.
Yeah, and it's important to note too, like there's some of those stages where we actually shot one, pardon me, at skirmish last weekend, where you have 3 targets in a line. There's 2 different shooting boxes. You have to shoot multiple strings with rifle in between both shooting boxes. You switch over a pistol, shoot in one box, and move over to another box. Yes, you want to shoot it fast, but shooting it clean, I think, is more important than shooting it fast, because if you shoot out of order, if you're supposed to be shooting near to far and you shoot far to near, you're going to be getting procedurals on all those shots. So something to consider again is figuring out a good game plan, being able to read these concisely and understand what is asked of you while you're supposed to go through that stage.
Yeah, it brings up a great point. I'm not going to call anyone out, but a very tall, grizzly individual, a good friend of mine, is notorious for busting down doors and whatnot. Several years ago, complained to me, and not legitimately complained, but was frustrated that we used to have strings of fire that were, hey, string 1 is through 5 rounds through port 1, 3, and 5. And then if you have an extra shot fired, it was very confusing.
Yeah.
And multiple athletes would complain about this, but in this one particular conversation, Zach was told me, he said, I don't know why we're doing this. And I presented the situation of, hey, the course of fire is part of the test. It's not just getting the implement over the bar or hitting the rounds on target, but following directions is part of it. So on a shooting aggregate, for example, where we expressly write out, do this, then do this, then do this, can you follow those instructions? Now, other times it's, you can do anything you want, but at the end of the stage of fire, you have to have all these hits, right? So then you have options. But if we require you to do certain things, memorizing that's the third metric: physical, shooting, and the mental aspect to the sport. And I train people all the time that a planned action is always better than an unplanned reaction. It's always going to be faster to do what you intended to do the first time.
Yeah.
So reading the stage descriptions, listening during the briefs, and knowing where you're going will save you a lot of time. Now, in our sport, most of our athlete judges, our volunteers, our ROs, the other competitors, everybody is extremely helpful, most of them. I won't tell you anything when you're shooting, but it's a very uplifting community. So if you're on a stage and you get lost in the middle of it, 1, we don't want you to suffer, and 2, we don't want you to do something dangerous. We're not going to let you get hurt or anything of that. So if you ask a question in the middle of a stage of fire, or on a stage, for example, where am I going? You'll generally get pointed in the right direction, or you wait long enough, someone will pass you, and then you just follow them.
Yeah.
Don't get lost on the long runs. But if you're sitting there waiting for somebody to show you where you're going, it's just wasted time. So having those planned actions ahead of time. So again, the physical floaters and the shooting aggregates will be published. And if you show up, I don't expect for you guys showing up in Arizona that you're going to nail these things.
Yeah.
But if you show up to Nationals 2025 and you look at one of our shooting aggregates and you say, oh, this is crazy, I've never done this before, how can I be expected to do this? Well, it's February 3rd, and they're online today.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, mental management is one of the biggest parts of the game that not a lot of people well, I would say even people that have been in the sport for a little while, but being able to put a bigger emphasis on understanding how to map out a stage or have a good game plan going into something is imperative to how well you're going to do, because it's easy to do something on the first round, but once you get into that deep water and you start going rounds 2, 3, 4, and so on, and that tiredness sets in, you're getting fatigued, you start making sloppy mistakes. That's what separates people. That's what separates the better athletes from the newer athletes. So I'm very excited for these standards. I think it's going to be extremely helpful for everybody. So again, these will be dropped today. Again, you'll see them in the show notes here below. So we're looking forward to seeing you guys out there in Arizona, seeing you guys getting in the practice on these stages, and we're just looking forward to the 2025 season.
I'm waiting to see the dogfight that comes once people know how fast they can actually shoot.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be a good year. So we appreciate you guys as always. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in Arizona.